Hey there, CPO here, and it's a rear brake day on the TJ. So yeah, little problem. This was sort of an unplanned repair, but the parking brake shoes disintegrated and fell apart. Actually, both of the shoes broke on this driver's side rear. Went over a speed bump and like something broke loose, wasn't sure, made a nasty sound, checked it out, and come to find out it was the parking brake. So I'm replacing the parking brake assembly. I also bought a spring kit, a hardware kit for it, and I'm going to go ahead and replace the rotor and the pads for the rear brakes as well. These guys weren't horrible, but while I'm in there, I may as well just replace it all. It's my son's daily driver. He gets his driver's license on Tuesday, which is just like 2 days away. So may as well freshen this thing up. So this is pretty nasty and rusty. I'm spraying it all down with metal prep from Pour 15 just to sort of clean up the rust a little bit and get rid of the surface rust. So yeah, pulled this side off. I'm gonna go pull the other side off. Small tip, if you're doing brakes, it's a good idea to do one side at a time. That way you have a point of reference. When you start taking everything apart, you can go look at the other side and see how it goes together. I'm probably not going to do that. I'm probably going to disassemble that one so I can do the metal prep, spray it down, then rinse it, and then let it dry. So you do want to rinse after you do the metal prep, and then I want to let it dry as much as I can before I start really putting it back together. So I'm going to do that, then start throwing on some new brake parts. All right, and you can see how nasty these things are. I mean, I'm close to wanting to replace these calipers altogether, but I'll clean them up and take a look at them. I think they'll still be good. This one's worse than the other one though. Basically what I'm doing is pushing the caliper cylinder back in, which is going to reduce some clamping of the brakes onto the rotor. So I just need to do it enough to loosen everything up. And that way, after I pull these two guys here, it should just come right apart. Good news is these are in good shape. Because this one has a functioning parking brake, it is not going to come off so easy. So what I'm going to do is pull this little plug in the back for the adjustment area, and I'm going to use a screwdriver, or you could use a brake adjustment tool, but I just usually use a flathead screwdriver. And there's a little star wheel that you use to adjust. I'm going to basically reduce tension on the inside of this, which basically acts as a drum for those shoes for the parking brake. I've already gone through and made sure that my parking brake adjustment cable that goes to the handle is loose. All right, so I'm trying to show you this here. If you look back, so I've got a light shining. This is the adjuster hole in the back, and you see that little star wheel. I'm just using a small screwdriver to rotate that wheel in a what direction? I'm pushing it in a downward direction. So but what I'm doing is I'm backing off. This is really hard to do, holding the camera and doing this with one hand, but hopefully you can see that wheel rotating, and that's basically just backing off the parking brakes and releasing their grip on the inside of this rotor. So disc brakes with a shoe style parking brake, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like, it's called a hat rotor, and there's a surface on the inside just like a regular brake drum, and then there's a regular rotor surface for your brake pads. So now that I have that done, we can see the parking brake assembly, give you a better look. This is a better look at that adjustment wheel that we were adjusting from the other side. So by rotating it in this direction, we were compressing that, which brings in these shoes away from the drum. And if we rotate it the other way, which we'll do when we install, we're going to push them out. All right, for disassembly, I'm going to pull this spring off the bottom. All right, now I'm going to release this spring here. And then next you have these little clips that retain these pins. And I just basically hold the pin in, push down the clip. Till it frees, and then these things will just come right off. And the assembly starts to come apart. This is the part that connects to your parking cable. And yeah, this thing is nasty. First thing I'll do is hit it all with the degreaser. Brake clean. Pull out those little pins. These guides can come off too, because we're going to be replacing them. They come with the new brake pads. Yeah, this is kind of gross. Now that it's dry, I'm going to hit it with some Pour 15, which will basically convert that surface rust into some freaky inert version of a metal. I'll let that sit for a while and then rinse it down. In the meantime, I'll start working on assembling the other side. All right, so I did get some replacement shoes, and I also got an optional extra replacement hardware kit. I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this whole thing. All right, after a slight rain delay, I have the driver's side done for the parking brake. So this is kind of what it looks like after things have been cleaned up. A combination of lithium grease and anti-seize. And there you go. There's the fresh hardware, fresh brake shoes, and in case you needed to see how things go together. So I'll try and show you some tips as I assemble the other side. I'm going to finish this side sort of off camera just because it's starting to get dark. And then I'll do the other side probably tomorrow. It'll be daylight, and I'll show you some tips along the way. All right, so I've got the driver's side done. I'm moving over to the passenger side, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this showing you the reassembly, because I didn't really find any good videos that show you the detailed reassembly on this, and also like how to problem solve if you run into something that's not working right. So the first thing I want to mention is this assembly here, right? This is what the cable attaches to, and then this is what will adjust the brakes out whenever you set the parking brake, or bring them back in whenever you release it. So it's important that this thing moves freely. So the driver's side, I had to do a little work to get it to free up. It was a little bit cruddy and nasty and a little stiff. So you should be able to freely sort of move this around. And let me show you what happens when I pull the emergency brake. See how that moves and shoots over to the side? That is what's going to expand your brakes. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that that freely moves. Now we're going to lubricate this here in a second, but before you even start putting on the shoes, make sure that this assembly is free and can move. Again, that's sort of in the normal position, and that's emergency brake pulled position. And you're going to want that to move and adjust accordingly. I actually found, believe it or not, sometimes having the emergency brake in the halfway up position or just slightly up helps a little bit, but we'll get to that if I need it again in this particular reassembly. All right, so that's that. Now this backing plate is on the verge of being something replaceable. Like, it's right on the verge, but I did clean up the areas that are important. In particular, you want to make sure that this is sort of free of crud, but there are these raised sections, like right here, and then the same thing on the other side over here, that your shoes are going to ride against. So we're going to lubricate these, but we also want to get them as cleaned up as good as possible. These will also present a problem when you're reinstalling the shoes if they get lodged behind one instead of on top of it. So I'll show you that and how you might identify that that's a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and prep this for reassembly. First of all, I'm going to lubricate this. Now the brake kit does come with a lithium grease, or you could use your own lithium grease. What I'm going to do is use just an anti-seize lubricant, and basically, just because I can get in there with a brush. Now you don't want to get lubricant everywhere, because then the problem comes in that you don't want this on your brake shoes themselves or on the rotor assembly. But you can see how just manipulating that brake allows me to get in here and lubricate that. That might be a little bit excessive on lubricant, but the other thing I'm going to lubricate are these points right here, where that brake shoe is going to rub against the backing plate. All right, so as far as the shoes go, they're identical. All four of them that come in the kit are the same. So grab any two and just make sure that you have them aligned properly. So as you can see, that's actually upside down. As you can see, there's a wider space up here with bigger holes spread further apart. On the bottom is a narrower space with holes closer in. So it's going to go like this with the wider holes up on the top. See how I just pushed that all in, right? So we'll adjust that here in a second, but before I do that, let me show you how these are going to fasten to the backing plate. So these are a little bit different than the ones that I took off, but it's basically a pin with a crimp in it that matches that hole. You're going to push it through there, rotate it, and it's going to lock in place. So my thumb is holding pressure on the back of that pin while my finger holds it all together. There we go, and locks into place. Also, try your best not to touch the surface of this. I know it's going to happen. Just try and keep from getting grease everywhere. All right, so first the pin going through the hole, lining up that, putting the pin where I want it, which ideally is some sort of an angle I can match with this, holding that all together, pressing in, rotating, and now it's locked into place. All right, so that is how you get your shoes just up on the backing plate. All right, you'll notice I change my gloves a lot. I go through a lot of these gloves. They're cheap, and by keeping my hands fairly clean, it saves me a bunch of ridiculous cleanup later. All right, so what I'm doing now is just sort of trying to align this it's sort of not wanting to fit together up here the way I want it. So I'm gonna go raise the emergency brake, maybe a little bit, halfway, just to change. There we go. See how that pops in now? That is tip number one, is manipulate that emergency brake. Even though I have a lot of slack on the cable, it's enough to move that around and get it set into place. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is add in the spring. This spring, which in my case is purple, is gonna go in the top 2 holes here. And it's a little bit awkward to get, and there is a good tool for this. I'm not using it, so I'm gonna show you the hard way, and that's with a pair of needle nose pliers. But they do make spring tools that make it easier to pull and latch springs. So what I'm gonna do is spread this out a little bit to be able to get that started through that hole. It's gonna go from the top and then hook in. Let me show you that end again. So when it's in there, it's gonna go from basically through the hole and then up and then lock on the bottom. So into the hole and then it locks. And then we're gonna squeeze this side over to the other end. But before I do that, I'm gonna go lower the emergency brake because I want as much closeness as I can get there. I don't want to be fighting myself. All right, so I got it by grabbing that hook and sliding it along. You may find that your spring ends up on top of this little shelf here. And if that's the case, just push it down underneath. Mine, the other side, when I brought it across, ended up on top of the shelf. So it needs to be from the bottom, and then that little raise in the spring will rest on the bottom of that. All right, so now we're gonna be working on the lower adjustment star, the wheel, and the collar for that. I'll show you that here in a second. And then the lower spring. So this wheel basically is what's used to adjust how much pressure's on or off those shoes in the resting position, basically, and then how tight they go. And then there's just this little sleeve, and as you adjust the wheel, it separates and spreads this bolt inside the sleeve. So we're going to lubricate this. This is where I'm going to use that lithium grease that came in the package. And there doesn't seem to be a left or a right side. I know some brake systems, the auto adjusters, have a left side and a right side. These are identical as far as I can tell, and work exactly the same. So the wheel is going to go towards the back side on this side. On the other side, it went towards the front side. So that's why it's the same wheel. It's just facing a different direction depending on which side. So the way you know where to place that wheel is it needs to be in front of that slot. That's the slot that you use to adjust from the back. So it's not quite in the center, it's off center a little bit. So on this passenger side, it's to the back. On the driver's side, it's to the front. So that's a good guide for how to align that up. All right, now I'm just gonna lubricate the crap out of this bolt and make sure that that adjustment wheel, all those threads are thoroughly lubricated. And then I'm gonna screw it till it's at its smallest size. And then I'm also gonna lubricate these little slots on the end that's gonna mate against the shoe. All right, so with that, basically there's a little slot you'll find where this is gonna slide into. And then I'm just gonna bring my shoe out a little bit until I can get it in that slot, and then push the shoe in to hold it. Again, trying not to get grease all over your shoes. So I just made a glove change. Now I'm gonna make sure that these Shoes are pushed in, and now the spring is going to go on. The spring isn't directional. You're going to get it in one of those holes and then pull it through to the other. This is a lot easier to do than that top spring. And it's going to rest against that wheel that is used for adjustment. Okay? All right, so remember I told you that there's those little bumps that the shoe will ride on? Sometimes they'll get stuck on them and not on top of them. I think that's what we have going on here. Now I just lifted that up and the entire assembly was able to close in a little bit more. So how you know if you need to do that, when you go to put your rotor on, it's not going to fit because these are going to be pushed out like that. And it won't close in because it's trapped behind that little knob. So you need to just lift it up and get it to free up until it pushes in. And you'll feel it sort of slide back and forth. That's when you know things are in a good place. All right, I'm going to clean this rotor with some brake clean. They come shipped with some oil just to protect them. So I'm going to get all that oil off. You can see this is sort of called a hat rotor. There is a drum sort of surface inside, and then you also have your rotor. So you've got shoes for the parking brake and pads for the main stopping brakes. Let me go and work the parking brake so you can see how that works. Make sure everything moves freely. All right, now I should be able to put on my rotor. Okay, so check it out. It doesn't want to go on. Don't force it. This is what hung me up on the driver's side. No matter how much you force it, it's not going to work, right? So what you need to do is stop. And again, these pads get trapped on the outside of those bumps. As a matter of fact, what I found is putting the parking brake about halfway frees things up enough that you can get it adjusted properly. See? Just like that. Now, if you want, you can do what I choose to do. And I like to put a little bit of anti-seize on this surface where it's going to mate with the rotor, just to keep it from sort of rust welding in there. I even don't mind putting a little bit on that hub area. Again, super important not to touch those critical braking points. All right, so now what I'm going to do before I put my rotors back on is I'm going to go ahead and adjust the parking brake right now because I have no interference with the rotors. I put the Jeep in neutral. It can spin freely, and so now is a perfect time and clean up this extra anti-seize that squirted out and adjust those parking brakes. So I'm going to do that by adjusting this star wheel, and I'm pushing it in the up position so it's rotating this way, and that's going to expand it, those brakes. So in a sense what I've done is I've expanded those brakes until they're touching and I can feel the drag, and then taking a little bit of tension off of them. All right, you want to try and adjust both of these wheels the same on each side. I counted mine and used that number to sort of find a starting place. And then we really only have two things left to do to finish off the parking brake install. One of them is adjust the parking brake cable So what I'm going to do is go up underneath and then tighten that one nut that's going to tighten the cable, being careful not to tighten it to compress the brakes. And then we have to condition them, which I'll show you here hopefully in a few. Kind of hard to show you underneath there, but you may find that using a pair of pliers to hold the adjustment bracket and then using the wrench for the nut will work out. That way the whole thing doesn't try and spin on you. So anyway, that's done. All right, so now we're gonna focus on the disc brakes. I'm just gonna loosen up this cap, let some air escape because I'm gonna press those caliper pistons back in, and I want to see, number one, do I have a little bit of room for fluid to go, which I do have a little bit, and just releasing the air will let some of that depressurize instead of forcing the air as well. So the easy way to do this is to take your old pad, just go ahead and pop it back in. We'll use that as a platform to put the caliper. As I tighten down that C-clamp, you can see right here where my thumb is, that piston is going back inside the caliper. And of course that's forcing brake fluid up and back into the system, back into the master cylinder reservoir, which is why I popped that cap. All right, so these new pads come with these new clips. These are important to replace. And you can see here I have the original ones. So those are coming off. These should clip in the same place. You can see how this M on the end fits down and sort of centers it. Now here's the pads I'm putting on. Now the backs of these are rubberized. This is sort of the higher end brand, which is designed to prevent some squeaking. But if I don't have that, I will usually put some grease on those. And then that'll press inside that hole, just like that. And you want to make sure you use brake grease. This is what came with the brake pads. It's a high temp grease. All right, this is gonna slide in there. Then, by the way, some people like to lubricate both sides of this little abutment anti-rattle slider thing. It's up to you whether you do or not. As I press this on, I do want to add some grease right here. And as that clicks in, that'll be there. Now these are your caliper mounting bolts. These also will get a healthy dose of grease. There's no call for Loctite on these. There is a torque spec, however. So assuming they're torqued properly, you should be fine. I do know some people like to use Loctite. Look, the torque spec is so small. It's 11 foot-pounds. So not a lot of pressure there on these. 11 foot-pounds is 132 inch-pounds, which is what I have this little guy set for. Okay. This side is done. We can put our wheel on, move to the other side. I torque to 100 foot-pounds for wheels. And I always heat each one twice. brakes are done. We should be good to go. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one.